Hello, this is Stuart Hicks from the Architecture with Stuart YouTube channel, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild. As our listeners know, we're solid fans of Bjarke Ingels and his wildly successful design practice spanning London, Copenhagen, New York, and China, not to mention new offices opening up every few years. With projects like the combination incinerator and ski slope in Copenhagen, and in New York, Via 57, Spiral, the 11th Towers, and the Big U flood protection barrier wrapping around most of Manhattan, Bjarke's firm BIG never stops. They continue to do amazing projects, even designing habitats for the moon and Mars. Listen to our interview with Bjarke himself on Show 300. George was back at the Bjarke Ingels Group offices recently to interview another bigster, as they call themselves, partner Martin Voelkle. Here's your host, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Hey, thanks, Tom. A question I get asked frequently is, why should I pay an architect when I can just go to a realtor and buy a house in a week? So let's start today to answer that with the economics of home design. I hate to break this to you, America, but architects lose money designing houses. Until a house budget is about $2 million or more, an architect would be much better off designing a church or a school or an office with an even bigger budget. That church or school or office is not going to take that much longer than the house, so the architect comes out way ahead. Yet architects are designing modest houses all the time. And why? They love it. The intimacy. House design is far and away one of the most satisfying experiences for most architects. They get to know the client deeply. They get to fully express new ideas and almost always end up with extremely happy clients who never want to live in another house again. No matter how artistic you think you are, an architect is way more skilled in imagining the scale, space, and structure of a house. If you buy a 3,600 square foot house from a developer, it's going to be nice and well appointed, but it's going to cost you 3,600 square feet worth. An architect can design a 2,400 square foot house that lives like a 3,600 square foot house at 2/3 of the cost. That's way more savings than an architect's fee, which is typically around 10 to 12%. You can take those savings and run, or you can bling out your house with all the dwell-worthy appliances and finishes you want. Either way, you win. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Architect Martin Voelkle has worked with Bjarke Ingels, or BIG, since 2010, when he joined the Copenhagen office. Martin moved to the New York City office in 2012 and then moved to London in 2016 to open BIG's third office. Named a BIG partner in 2018, he has overseen the design, development, and completion of projects such as 2 World Trade Center in New York, the Smithsonian Master Plan in Washington, D.C., and the King's Cross Google headquarters in London. He's now back in New York and, among other responsibilities, manages BIG's high-profile house designs. Here's George's conversation with Martin, recorded in the BIG offices in Brooklyn, New York.
Martin, you're no spring chicken here. You've been here a while with the firm. How did you become associated with Bjarke in the beginning?
Actually, I started on the first day of the decade in 2010, on the 1st of January in Copenhagen. I was moving there from Germany. Our previous firm that I worked with kind of had run out of work and thought maybe I'll try BIG in Copenhagen. And it was probably the best decision I ever took. And I wasn't really prepared for what I'm getting into, because compared to the small firm that I was working with back in Germany, it was an amazing kind of spirit. It was almost like a different profession because you're surrounded with around 50, 60 people amazingly enthusiastic about the profession. Not that didn't happen in Germany, but it was just on a different level because it was people coming from America, from Asia, like all coming together in this small studio in north of Copenhagen and just creating like this amazing competitions and schemes. And I was a bit overwhelmed in the beginning, but I was working like 60, 80, 100-hour weeks in the beginning. It was really... And I was thrown into one of the big competitions that Bjarke had won the year before in 2009. He won a competition for 2000 in Shenzhen in China. So, when I first met him, he told me, like, we hired you to build these 2 towers. Like, are you ready? And I was, yes, sure. I didn't work in China before. I've never done a tower before, but I was just thrown into cold water and together with a very experienced colleague that also hired at the same time as me. I was leading the design, he was managing the project, and then I was really fully immersed in this one project. And after almost 2 years, we concluded a detailed design, and then I moved on to other projects, and that's kind of how I got started at BIG.
And that one got completed? Did that building get constructed?
Yeah,
okay.
Because of the pandemic, or it completed in 2016, and being here in New York, I didn't have the chance to travel there, but I saw it just recently because we won another competition last year in a different area of Shenzhen of also 2 towers. So I went there a couple of weeks ago to visit the client and present the design development, the first chance to see my first built projects after more than 10 years after I started working on it. So it took a long time to build it, and it took even longer for me to go there and see it. But
the firm has an office in Shenzhen now, right?
yes, you have probably around 8-10 people there that are doing active work. They're also trying to find new work, of course, because you need to be on the ground to meet with the people on a daily basis. And I think the competition for the Shanghai towers that we won last year is actually the first product of being on the ground and having this direct dialogue with the client group. Because if you're not in the country or in the city that you're working in China, it's really hard to make things
very
happen.
difficult.
So it's a bit of a strategic office right now. They're helping some of the projects that are in later stages. We're doing a bit of CA work, also overseeing some construction of one project. And hopefully we grow that office into even a bit larger in the future once we have more projects.
When you started, was the firm coming off its big successes in the Orestad area of Copenhagen, the buildings
Correct.
there?
That's like the first 2, the VM house and the mountain were completed. That kind of made BIG famous in a way. Right?
Yeah.
It's kind of the first 2 residential projects are really... They're still amazing. I think they're still...
They are. I've been to them. They're terrific.
Still one of our best work, I think. And then the 8 house was under construction, which is a complete different category. I almost think it's like a whole community in one building because there's different functions, there's different programs stacked on top of each other, and it's a much bigger building. It's fully accessible. You can bike around. Like it's open to the public. You have this bike path that goes in a figure 8 or up and down. But at that time, it was under construction, so it was like the third big piece. And it had a much more difficult construction period because it's much more difficult to build such a huge building. I think it has 800 units, if I'm not mistaken, but it's a much more complex because of different programs and accessibility and different housing types. You have like double-loaded corridors and then almost like penthouses on top that have windows on both sides, so with the path in front. So it was a very complicated undertaking. It took a couple of years to build. I wasn't there at that time, but I think they were a bit more straightforward to construct, even though they had like great innovations, like the parking garage and the penthouses on top for the mountain, and the VM with this kind of almost cactus-like balconies that are creating like a kind of focal point for every unit. So it's a different level of innovation that we did with the 8 house, and it took much longer to build, but it was just completing when I started. So it was very interesting to see that coming to life. And when you go there now, it feels like it's fully inhabited. In the beginning, it almost felt a little bit too large. It was the only building in that area for a long time. Mm-hmm. Now they actually built a whole neighborhood around it, so it feels much more embedded. The way it was meant to be, it's like it's part of the city. It's not
not isolated,
like an isolated block that it was in the beginning.
So you were there when there were 40, 50 people in the firm. Now how many does the company have worldwide?
We're, I think around, I mean, it's changing every day, but I think we're probably hitting 700 now with offices. And we still have the Copenhagen office, which is the biggest. They're just moving into a new building.
A new, brilliant building. I've been seeing that in the press.
I think it's also one of our best work. It's very pure. If you're your own client, you can make decisions that maybe like regular clients that have like a more commercial pressure on their buildings are unable to do. So we took some very bold decisions with continuous atrium for the entire building. And I still haven't seen it in person, but I'm looking forward to it in September for the opening.
Oh, for the opening, okay.
Copenhagen is around 350, I believe, right now. We have space for over 400 in the new space. So that's probably going to be the size of Copenhagen. And we have around 130 in London. New York is always around 200, plus minus. So that is kind of, that are the biggest offices. Then we have a Barcelona office, a Shenzhen office. We recently opened LA office, which is
an LA office. Okay.
People there. There, the one partner, Leon Rost, he moved over there with a few people and have some active projects going on. So he's just continuing that work, and it's still part of the New York office, so more like a satellite.
Yeah.
And then we also won the competition for the Zurich Airport Terminal A.
Yes.
It's a timber building, which is
one of the largest in the world. It's going to be.
Once completed. It's going to take probably 10 years until it's fully completed, but very exciting. So we also moved a small team, or a sizable team, to Zurich. So we have a Zurich office now, but it's still part of New York, since I was a partner in charge of the project. So it's run as part of New York. But the team is sitting in Zurich and working there.
Now, what's been fascinating to me in watching the firm over the last 15 years is how well it's been documented. There have been, 2 movies about it at least so far?
Yes. Abstract on Netflix. I think that's quite it's a couple of years old. And then
Big Time.
Big Time. That's Kasper Schröder. He's a filmmaker from Copenhagen, he's a close friend to Bjarke. Has been following him his whole life. That's 2 larger pieces that are out there. And then there's some smaller, 60 Minutes.
60 Minutes was, I guess, 8 years ago now? It was that big breakthrough?
Yes.
It's so rare that 60 Minutes talks to architects.
Yeah, true, yeah. Bjarke still hasn't made it to the Times cover, but
okay. They haven't done that in decades, have they?
No, I think maybe Philip Johnson was the last.
Philip Johnson, Neutra was on, Edward Durrell Stone, I think was on.
I don't think that will happen again.
Okay.
Put an architect in the Time magazine. But I feel very honored to be part of this firm because I wasn't part of the original breed of partners. One of the partners that's here in New York that moved over here just to open an office, Thomas Christoffersen, he was the first employee of Bjarke. He was the first person he hired. So
is that Kai Uwe?
Thomas Christoffersen. Yeah.
Okay.
And he was employee number 1 of BIG. The people that have been here since early 2000s, when it was still Plot and then became BIG, is kind of the original partners there. I've gotten much more close contact with the origins of our thinking. I came in without really knowing what I'm getting into. So I've always been following BIG and Plot before.
Yeah.
Like every student in the 2000s. I never expected to work there, and then suddenly I got this job, and I started, and I got like this full immersion into the thinking of Bjarke and his, like the way he works and the way the firm works, almost like being thrown into cold water with this 2 towers in China, because the firm, I've never done a tower before, so we all learned at the same time. I got fully immersed into this learning experience. And then moving to New York, really, it was a better time. I moved to New York, like Copenhagen was growing to over 100. It was like a very small startup atmosphere here in New York. Like 35 people in a Chelsea office, very small, very close community. Just 2 or 3 partners that were here at the time. And we call the people here bigsters. So I'm not an original bigster. I came in as an outsider in the beginning, but I got a very strong immersion in the first couple of years, and somehow I gained the trust of Bjarke to make me a partner, and I feel very honored to be part of this.
Well, I imagine if your employee is 700, they would consider you a pretty high up bigster.
Yes, yeah, that's true. I mean, at BIG, it's about who is staying the longest. It's not just being here for long enough to.
Yeah.
I think once you deliver, it's not so much about how many buildings you have built or how many years you've spent at BIG. It's more about what he sees in the people here. So you can see it. I mean, partners and promotions or titles are one thing, but it's also who gets which project and
right.
I mean, it's relatively horizontal here. Right? Bjarke is traveling a lot. He's here 4 months of the year, so roughly. But he also spends time in Copenhagen a lot. So he really has to delegate to other people that can deliver. Back in the days, like architects were doing sketches, and then a couple of people were just taking the sketch and trying to make a building out of it. I think the way it works here is a bit different. So Bjarke sometimes makes a sketch, and then you can try to see what it could mean if it works as a building. But often it's quite the opposite. Then we have this almost like evolutionary design process where you see what could fit best this site with the program and see what could you come up with that is adding something to the project that you usually wouldn't add, like another
like
program.
Smoke rings on an incinerator.
Yeah, yes, that's probably one of the most extreme examples, but I think actually that project is a great example for this way of thinking that if you get a competition, we did a competition for this waste treatment plant in Copenhagen.
The most boring project imaginable, really.
Very boring program. So everyone tried to come up with a very exciting facade around this very boring program. And what we did and thought was quite exciting, and it took a bit of courage to actually propose that. Right? So
this was in the movie. I watched this in the film where the client was talking about getting their head around turning this thing into a ski slope.
So we did a relatively boring facade with a park and a ski slope on top, so that made it the outstanding proposal that ultimately won, and they actually almost missed the deadline. The project leader, who's also a partner now, Ryan Yang, he was bringing the submission with a taxi and almost missed the deadline, so we were lucky that we actually got in. And
that should be in the next movie.
Right? We should maybe. And also great to get the trust of the client in that it could be something extraordinary. And I think it's still one of the buildings in the world that you could really make a difference with architecture. It's not just cladding something in an exciting, shiny material, but because it's the waste treatment plant is so clean, you can actually bring people on its roof. And there's so many layers in that statement that you can make. I mean, waste is part of pollution, and turning that into an asset in a city I think that has so much impact, much more impact than any other building you can have. And I think we're trying to bring that way of thinking into almost every project. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we don't. We try to innovate with every project, but some projects have a higher level of innovation and others have a lower level of innovation. I think we just...
And I imagine some clients don't care that much either.
We try not to do projects just, if someone wants big and wants a big project, wants the name on the building, I think we try to almost stay away from that and always have at least one innovative aspect of the project. I mean, it could be sometimes a very simple gesture, maybe opening up for the people, bringing people into the building. And
like Via 57.
For example, I mean,
in New York.
It is also one of the most outstanding projects we have. It looks it's kind of the start of 57th Street at the waterfront, so it kind of starts that ascent. But a lot of those towers were not built when we started construction on Via 57, and it feels like it's something that hasn't been done a lot in New York. Like that and the construction costs are going higher and higher, and we don't want to build residential buildings that are unaffordable. So, and with Durst, we somehow met a developer who actually has the trust and the almost like willpower to make a project like this happen. And I think it took them a lot of energy. It took us a lot of energy to actually get it built, because it's very unusual for...
It's certainly one of the most unusual buildings in all of New York, really.
And it is iconic, but it really delivers for the residents an incredible experience in being inside the courtyard. A lot of buildings don't have a courtyard.
Yes.
By pulling one corner of the building into the air almost like as a skyscraper, but then providing almost a European quality in the courtyard is a very rare hybrid that doesn't need only a creative architect, it really needs a developer who wants something unusual. And we can have ideas and do sketches and proposals all day long, but to make them happen, we really need...
it always takes a good client.
A good client, yeah. And I think the Spiral is actually a good example also. The Spiral building, an office building in Hudson Yards that has a terrace on every floor. Every office floor has an outside space. And it's one of the biggest buildings in the city. It's 2.8 million square feet. So there's a lot of mass and a lot of big floor plates. And then they have this relatively small outdoor space, but it really makes a difference. Now the office market is struggling. So a lot of older buildings that are office buildings should be probably converted into residential because they're really not suitable for, as with low ceilings and not a lot of daylight, they're not suitable for office space. But I think the Spiral is one of the new office buildings that is really making a difference by providing outdoor space. And then you have the outdoor spaces cascade in a spiral form around the building. There's also an amenity space on the roof with an outdoor space. Pfizer is actually taking 10 floors in the building. They have a podium roof terrace. And it's, I think, over almost 80% rented now, so which is a good sign in these days where a lot of office landlords are struggling to keep their tenants or find...
And you have a new building, it used to be called the 11. I think it's called, Hudson Yards now?
No, it's One High Line.
One High Line.
Yeah, it's a hotel and a residential building.
That's going to be opening soon.
They started selling the apartments. One tower is mostly hotel, the other tower is residential. A quite remarkable building next to the High Line, and kind of opening up for this view. It's similar, maybe not as dramatic as the VR57. The two towers are twisting against each other so that the tower that's in the back, where we usually would have no views because the taller tower is standing in front, we're twisting the larger tower away from the smaller tower so that the smaller tower units or hotel rooms still get a view to the Hudson River.
Yeah. You've really formed a niche here within the firm of working on houses, not just big residential projects like One High Line, but also some private residences. Tell me about some of those projects, because I think that's pretty fascinating that there's still a place in this huge firm for residences.
Yes. I've completed one residential building in Mexico City. I was a project leader back in, it was probably 2014. That was built 2 or 3 years later. So that's one residential project we've completed. It was a great client. But sometimes we're struggling with private residential clients because as a big firm with a relatively large structure, it's really hard to have that one-to-one attention.
Yes.
And I think a lot of other large firms, just being very honest, I think it takes like one person or one partner being almost like full-time there for that one client. That is often, it's a couple or it's a family that has like different requirements. So I've been through one other project that didn't get built, and it was at the end, wife and husband just couldn't agree that this building is the right thing for them to do. So the husband was very ambitious with lots of cantilevers, like something that's like wow here, a big courtyard. But the master bedroom was in the cantilever. So, this is just normal. I think
that happens a lot. That's happened all the way back to Frank Lloyd Wright and his clients.
They didn't feel comfortable having a cantilevering master bedroom, and without that, the whole scheme didn't work anymore. So and you have to go through the process, even if it doesn't get built. You have to have the direct calls all the time for these clients, and you have to be there all the time. No matter what, you have to drop everything else and
pick up the phone and
do
talk to people.
I think that's very hard, especially if you want it personally from Bjarke. It's almost impossible. He has so much to do that he can't provide.
There's no time.
I think with a partner like me, you could probably get that attention, but then you sometimes successful, like in Mexico. I was like in direct dialogue with the client all the time and trying to listen what they really want and what they're looking for.
And that house was covered a lot in Architecture Digest, as I recall.
This was one of the title
cover stories, Really great.
It took a lot to get there. We were like probably working on different concepts. There were 2 concept phases, let's say. Usually we're working on a concept for 8 weeks. So the first one he was quite excited about. Then we found out we can't build it because we didn't get the correct information for the zoning.
Okay.
And then we tried to make it work and propose scheme after scheme, and he was like, no, this is not good. This looks like a spaceship. I don't like it. And then finally, the last grasp okay, let's try one more. And I was sitting down in Bjarke, and he was like, let's try this. And then a box and stretch it, put a pool here. And then the scheme was born. It was like an amazing moment. And it's a very simple move, right? It's just the front facade of the building is twisting to make room for a 50-meter pool, which is the Olympic length. The client is very athletic, has a big gym in the basement, and they wanted an Olympic-sized pool, which doesn't really fit on the sides. You have to put it diagonally to fit into the side. And then you form the entire building to make room for the pool. We did that in 3D, and he was always sitting next to me and like sketching together, and then we finally had this scheme, and wow, this is amazing. But the client had like rejected similar schemes before, and I was like almost scared to show it. But then we showed it to him, and he was excited and moved forward. So that was sometimes you have this kind of moment when it clicks, everything works, but it took a long time to build. We had to find the right contractor. Concrete is a tricky material because when you cast it and expose it, the formwork, it has to be perfect. If the client is very demanding, he didn't accept any mistakes or any imperfections. So we had to, some of the walls we actually had to build 2 times or 3 times until it was perfect.
If all this sounds expensive, it is when you're talking buildings, when you're talking custom homes in Mexico City. But something that's very exciting is that your firm has been the lead architect working with home builder Lennar in Austin, Texas, to design 3D printed homes that are on the market now for I think about $450,000.
Yes.
I mean, very, very affordable units.
Yeah. I think they're actually just opened a model home, and so the first of the buildings of the houses is completed. The story with Icon, which is the 3D printing company that we're working with in Austin, it goes back a couple of years. So we didn't start with the 100 homes for Lennar. We started with a project with NASA. So Icon got invited to propose a 3D printing system for the moon.
This was to recycle the dust into the mortar that would build the home. Okay, yeah.
So we started working with Icon on that project, and they were very excited to bring us on board and to basically propose a master plan for the moon, for a first settlement, for a first permanent, locally built with local resources on the moon, which is essential, right? You can't just fly expensive payloads to the moon or like inflatable structures that would be very...
I'm sure there's a billboard on the moon that says, buy local.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to, rather than bringing all the equipment to the moon, we thought we'd bring a machine to the moon that can actually build buildings. I think that is a very transformative thought that a couple of people at NASA have actually been leading the research into. And then since Icon is a startup that is working on a 3D printer on Earth, they applied for that project to also build a 3D printer for the moon and got the grant in the beginning, a very small grant, just a couple of months of research just to see what happens. And they brought us in as a designer, and it was very exciting to propose something that could be hypothetical 3D printer that is taking the dust on the moon, put it into a microwave or put it into under a laser, melt it, and then do layer by layer. Like 3D printing on Earth is usually extruded on concrete that is pressed out of a nozzle, and then layer by layer. Instead of concrete on the moon, we use the local material, which is the moon dust, a very fine sand. We have some simulant here that we test and played around with, but it is a very fine kind of dust almost. It's very almost hazardous because it goes into every crack and it destroys machines. You have to almost come up with a new way of mechanics also to work with that in that environment. So we developed buildings that work in that environment. The environment is very harsh, very low temperatures. It's cold. It's also very hot when the sun is shining. So it goes from minus 257 Celsius to over 300 plus. So it's
I didn't realize there was that much temperature variation on the moon.
So it's like fluctuating very strongly, but it's doing that very slowly because the days on the moon are 28 days long. So a full moon cycle is 1 day on the moon. So very hot for 14 days and it's very cold for 14 days.
Okay.
Also, maybe I'm getting too much into detail.
No, I'm a space nerd, so absolutely, this is fascinating.
So you have solar power for 14 days, and then you have no solar power for 14 days. And depending where you are on the moon, what NASA is actually looking into is going to the South Pole because you have a bit more 360, but a very low solar angle.
Okay.
Some of the other projects we've been doing on the moon were more like more at the center, the equator of the moon. But for this project, we went on the South Pole. Another reason to go to the South Pole is because there's water, so you can actually use some of the water to sustain life.
Well, let's get back to Austin and these houses that we can get here on Earth for $450,000.
Since that went so well, Jason Bauer, the CEO of Icon, was bringing us more and more projects to us, and one of them was basically Lennar approached them if they could 3D print 100 homes for a very affordable price. So the typical price range of a Lennar home is around the $450,000 that you mentioned. So we started coming up with some ideas how this could be developed. We developed a whole neighborhood with 100 homes. We proposed some very innovative ideas. For example, like one of the historic typologies in Texas is a dog trot house, and it has this covered outer space, like a breezeway between the almost two parts of the house. Very nice way to spend outdoors when it's really hot and you get a bit of a breeze through the house. So we proposed a house that was similar to that, but Lennar said, let's not innovate on different housing topologies than what we usually do. So we came up with a series of like 6 to 8 home types there's some innovation in the floor plan. It's different from a typical Lennar house, but it's still like a typical rectangle with a 2-car garage.
Right.
It takes over a lot of elevation in the front. So you have almost like 2/3 of the elevation towards the street is dictated by a garage door. And then you have another third left to design. And then we also, almost the entire exterior appearance had to be reviewed by the neighborhood association. So we had to basically present this to the neighborhood, and they had to...
Wasn't this a new neighborhood association, essentially?
It is Wolf Ranch is a whole neighborhood, but there's other neighborhoods like
around it?
Around it, it's thousands of houses. So
okay.
There's some rules, and you have to follow those rules. And a 2-car garage and the setback, 5-foot setback for the garage is something that the neighborhood is dictating. So you have to follow those rules. They accepted 3D print as a material, which is not in their catalog typically. But then the roof forms and types and colors are also something that was had to be approved by the neighborhood.
And if I recall, these are what, galvanized steel roofs?
They're a standing seam.
Okay.
It's a metal roof. It's an upgrade. Lennar homes have asphalt tiles on the roof, which is, of course, not environmentally and also from a durability perspective, not the...
And it's very difficult to 3D print a roof, too.
Yes. So
right? You end up making these Adobe-like round structures I've seen photos of.
I think that is also not in the Lennar typology yet. So they're very much traditional houses in a way. Like when you look at them, you don't see that much of a difference to a typical house that Lennar is building. When you look a bit closer, I think there's a lot of things we actually...
a lot of things you would see up close.
Yeah. So maybe this kind of the modernists in us try to make it true to the functions. Some of the track houses in America are very much decorated with, extra roofs or extra angles or extra pitches just to make it more interesting. So just without any reason. And then it's clad with brick that's not really a brick. So one thing that 3D printing is, the wall is 3D print to expose the real material, which is great. And then second, we also try to simplify the roof geometries to the extent possible. So something very kind of clean, straight lines. And maybe some people might say it's boring, but you try to simplify it.
No. I think they're very attractive, actually, for a development house.
Yeah.
Much more so than average.
Yes, I think so too. And I think if you want to change the world and make housing better and more affordable, you have to start somewhere. You can't just say, like, here's a very affordable house that's completely 3D printed. It looks like a spaceship. No one will like it.
Right.
Or maybe some people will like it, but very few people will probably like it. No one will be able to, it's still very expensive to fully print a house. So it's probably not going to be affordable. So we said, let's innovate one step at a time. Let's start with the obvious things that are wrong with track houses, like this kind of fake articulation, the fake materials that are not really what they are.
Yeah.
The fiber cement, all the things that are added in
all the different wacky textures that can be put around the outside.
To make things interesting and make houses different from their neighbors. And that's one of the requirements is actually from the neighborhood is that they have to be different. They can't look the same. So to get away from that kind of too much repetition, so they're requiring a certain diversity. But we try to achieve that diversity with different elevations that are different because they have a slightly different program behind it, or a different entrance situation, or a different this high-quality roof, the standing seam, try to come up with roof geometries that are maybe inherently different because they have a slightly different geometry behind. I think it's quite successful. It might not be like the futuristic home you might be expecting from BIG when you think, but it is a first step in the right direction. And I think
I think it's a great example of your firm's work, actually.
Yeah, I agree too.
And it makes it much more accessible for people who want to venture out a little bit, but not too much.
Yeah, and also you have to test the market
to be able to experience that. Martin, the last thing I want to ask you about is kind of on the other end of the spectrum entirely, are these tiny little cabins called the A45.
Yeah.
Are those available? Can people order them now and put them on their property, or how do they get these things? I think they look fantastic.
It's actually a small little startup that's a separate company that's doing those homes. But we tried to come up with a way to build it. It seems like that, again, when you reduce things to something that's more minimalist, it almost gets more expensive, which is kind of counterproductive. So we've tried it to build one prototype here in upstate New York that was photographed and published. But then we tried to more like a mass production of the whole thing, and it's really hard to find the right partners to actually do that at an affordable level.
I mean, there's so many prefab companies now that are starting up. You think one of them would want to jump on board with you?
Yeah, we could. I think we actually had someone from Latvia. We built another prototype in Denmark, so we're still searching for the right partners. It's also something, as an architect, you're probably not a specialist in supply chain management or, coming up with the right. So you really have to have someone to partner with. And
how big are these cabins?
I think they're like around 300 square feet.
Yeah.
Very small.
So it can be a getaway place. It can be an ADU.
No,
right?
It's it could be an ADU. We offered them as a kit for a while. We basically still have to have someone provide the foundation and the wastewater and all the things that
all the hookups, right?
Because you can't really build a cabin that is fully self-sufficient. There's too much. You need solar panels and a water tank, and then it becomes even more expensive. So we're relying on the hookups and the foundation, and then providing the kit to build the cabin. But it wasn't really a breakthrough yet. I think we're still looking for the right partners to make this happen.
Well, one day when we have nuclear power that is the size of a backpack, which I think they're working on, then will it be much easier to make these small buildings work.
It's something we are learning on the master plans we are doing. Is actually, it is not very efficient to put solar panels on every roof because the maintenance is so difficult. Mm-hmm. It's much better to actually do a solar field that produces all the solar power in one place, and then the maintenance is consolidated. Some futuristic images of how homes of the future should look like have all solar roofs. Not saying that's wrong, but I think there's some efficiency in consolidating energy supply and infrastructure, because when every house is independent and self-sufficient, there's a certain inefficiency in the whole, because you have your own battery, you have your own solar panel, you have your own wind power. That gets very inefficient. If you build entire neighborhoods, you can be much more efficient. And then concentrate energy production or the wastewater treatment and all of these things. If they're all distributed in each home, I think the amount of energy you spend and the resources you need to make that happen is actually much greater than if you come together and solve that.
Do it in one place.
Which is already happening. So like wastewater is treated on a local level. And of course, it's not a great thing to have a wastewater treatment plant in your neighborhood, but it has to happen somewhere. If it happens in every backyard, it's also not great.
Right.
If you have a lot of land, you can make that happen. I think sustainability needs some concentration of habitat. That's why cities are inherently sustainable, because of concentration of people. They're very close together. They don't drive like miles and miles to get to work. They just take the subway and go to Manhattan.
Right.
I don't know if you've heard about the city Telosa.
Yes.
We try to come up with an idea for a new city in a desert that is completely self-sufficient. I think we're anticipating 5 million people living there, also with a very innovative idea of ownership. Once you become a resident, you basically generate value for yourself and your family. But also we investigated how to solve the city with infrastructure, with energy. And, every experiment in that direction is different. But I think right now I'm pretty convinced that you have to have some sort of consolidation and concentration of people living together to make it sustainable.
You can see all the houses that we've been talking about, and you can read about Tolosa. There's been a great deal of press about that in the last couple of months at usmodernist.org/Ingels. That's INGELS. Thanks so much, Martin. This has been fun to talk with you.
Thank you. Very exciting. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Palm Springs, Malibu, Los Angeles, and Toronto. Okay, Tom, take us out.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 20,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4.2 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl, with guest research by Kelly Policelli. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back soon with another big edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.